Greetings, New Templars and DSMP subscribers. I'm Dylan Lewis Monroe, aka A145, the Mapmaker, here today to do my first full walkthrough of the latest DSMP diagram, the World Hierarchy Pyramid. Some people are already saying this is the best diagram we've created yet, particularly because it has so much embellishment. It's almost a landscape in the background as well as all the great information on it. So we're very excited to finally do the full walkthrough of this diagram. And truth be told, I was supposed to be recording with Nicholas Veniamin today, and unfortunately he canceled on me last minute, 20 minutes before we were supposed to record. So I said, hey, I am fully prepared to do this solo if the content is a little bit too hot for the London boy. So we're going to get right into it. But before we do that, make sure you like and subscribe on this video. Subscribe to New Templars. And then so we can stay in contact, head over to deepstatemappingproject.com, link in the description where you can sign up for my newsletter, where you'll be notified of all our video drops, new map, new product launches, expo announcements, sales, which our Easter sale is coming up soon here, and more. Very important, the newsletter is our lifeline as we get censored on different other platforms, censored by other truther channels. The newsletter is our main way to stay in contact throughout the storm. And of course, on deepstatemappingproject.com too, you can support our operation by purchasing all of our different maps in different formats. We sell as laminations, which are very popular, posters, t-shirts. We have a new crystal section. And we also offer many of these maps and diagrams as downloads as well, which is more convenient for our international customers, where international shipping has just gone astronomically insane pricing-wise. So I do plan on finally listing the World Hierarchy Pyramid in a download format by the time this video is posted. A lot of guys have been asking about that, and so that product should be listed by the time you are watching this video. Also, minor announcement, I'm expecting anytime this week our latest sticker to arrive, which is a sticker of the God's Eye from the World Hierarchy Pyramid, which I can't say it turned out good yet, but I'm very excited to see it. It's going to be a hologram God's Eye, 3.3 inch by 3 inch. So very excited to see that. Our first sticker related to this diagram, and actually I think we're going to include that sticker for free with the 12-inch mini poster version of the World Hierarchy Pyramid. It comes in the 11-inch, the 12 by 18 mini poster, and of course the 24 by 36 gigantic poster you see here, which we are fully stocked with 2,000 units of. You know, I was expecting to get some major publicity on this one on bigger channels, but hey, this diagram is one for the history books. This is the final record of the most complex iteration of the Cabal's global control system that is currently in the process of being completely demolished by the White Hat Alliance. So this will be the record, the most complete record for all time to come, of exactly how bad it got, how complex it was, all the different names and compartments that was a part of this system. So let's dive right into this. The idea for me creating the World Hierarchy Pyramid went all the way back to 2017 when I first created the QWeb, on which there appeared a very small, simplified version of a World Hierarchy Pyramid that was actually one of the most important features of the diagram, dead center of the diagram, so central to understanding the entire hidden history of humanity. And the version that appeared on the original QWeb was very simplified, just briefly mentioning the sheep, the cattle, above them, government, religion, education, and media. Above that, banks, think tanks, and international corporations. Above that, the Committee of 300. Above that, the Council of 13. And above that, the Pindar, the contact point between humanity and Satan himself in the Cabal's control system. So that's where it started. And of course, to make that as accurate as possible, I did some research and found other people's renditions of different World Hierarchy Pyramids, one of which you see here. This was probably the best one I had for a long time, showing the progression of, who controls who in this world. I liked this one a lot, the way it went into a little bit of detail about the different religions, government, education, and media. And then, of course, it showed a lot of the different major corporations, especially energy and resource corporations, the logos here. And then, went up to the financial control, the round table and think tanks. But the one major thing that this diagram was missing was the secret societies. And there is a lot in that area to explore. And so while this one was good, it was not complete. And of course, you see as well, this one ends with the queen on top, which, although the queen is dead now, I don't believe that the queen or the current king was actually the tippy top of this entire world hierarchy system. And we also know in the broader 40,000 foot view, maybe even more than 40,000 foot view, 40,000 foot view looking inward on Earth and looking outward into space, that we know this power structure goes off planet. And I definitely wanted to capture that as well in my ultimate version of this style of a world hierarchy diagram. So my other main reference point for this diagram was this one, which is showing a little bit more of the occult Jesuit side of the world hierarchy pyramid. We had even also developed this as another standalone diagram that we offer at deepstatemappingproject.com, where we have the Jesuit power structure on the front and the Italian papal bloodline families on the back. And so this one kind of does paint the Jesuits as the highest order of control on planet Earth, which that's a little bit contestable as well, which you'll see in my final version of the diagram. But at least this one was integrating the Freemasonic structure, referencing Zionism and the Rothschilds, which in my version of this I have renamed Khazarian Mafia, essentially synonymous with the idea of Zionism and the Rothschilds. This one lists secret services, Illuminati, and CFR Bilderbergs as sort of equivalent on that second tier above the bottom, which, the way that's set up, I think is maybe not like that accurate. All of this is debatable, what's the most accurate. Not that I'm the ultimate resource either, but I have given very deep thought to, what comes above what, who is more important than who in this whole power structure. And of course, there is a lot of overlap as well, which I will speak on a little bit more as we get to my own diagram. But I did really like this one, in that it painted the Jesuits as so important, because I believe they are that high up, and understanding this power structure between the white pope, the black pope, and the gray pope is very critical in understanding all of this as well as the papal bloodlines. And nice that this one put Lucifer, Satan at the top, which even that terminology I might like to tweak a little bit myself. I would say Satan at the top of this one. Of course, Lucifer and Satan being the same entity in mythology, but at different time points in the storyline. So I don't believe that the names are fully interchangeable, and that it doesn't make sense to put, Lucifer at the top of this dark one. But we'll get to that as well. In my diagram, we go all the way off-world into the higher dimensions, all the way up to God the Most High. And so the last one that I was mainly referencing here, in fact, I have a folder of about 60 different world hierarchy pyramids. And so I've said before, I'm not just the map maker, I've become the map merger. And I do a lot of research for all of these. It's not just based on my opinion. I see all the different opinions out there, and weigh it with other sources, and then form my own opinion. I mean, ultimately, it is my opinion, but it's based on a lot of other people's research. And so this one I liked because this one really went into the extra-dimensional entities and the off-world entities. This one also pays tribute to the secret societies, which is absolutely essential. Deep state government, some military police. This one is obviously very simplified, and I would say less accurate in terms of being specific about things. And then it says Illuminati, Khazarian Mafia. Above them, the Reptilian and Draco. Above them, the Jesuits, which that really does not make a whole lot of sense to say, Jesuits are controlling the whole Draco-Reptilian race. That's an inaccuracy. And so you see, part of the reason why I did mine was to correct some of these inaccuracies on other ones, which, may present the correct players, but not in the correct order. And then this one places above the Jesuits the archons, which are very important to understand in the extra-dimensional hierarchy of all this, interdimensional ETs, and chimera at the top of this one, which there are some very much similarities from this one and mine, but I believe mine is the ultimate encapsulation of all this and the most accurate as well. Not to toot my own horn, but that was the intention in creating the diagram, was to do the definitive version. So without further ado, let's dive right into the definitive version, the DSMP World Hierarchy Pyramid, now completed. So here it is, the completed diagram. I think you can probably see just by looking at it briefly that it's a lot more complex than any of the other ones I just showed you. Like I said, the idea for this began all the way back when I created the QWeb, and I had all the research diagrams kind of set aside. I knew this was a diagram I wanted to add to DSMP's catalog in the future, but I had been working on other things and wasn't sure when I was going to get to it. But I began really working on this to complete it December 25th, I believe, or New Year's Eve of 2022. And the final version was saved on February 3rd, 2023. So roughly a little bit more than a month of working on this. I did struggle for a while of what I wanted it to look like and really had to consult my guides on, what should this power pyramid look like? Because a lot of these other ones, were just kind of 2D lines on top of black. And in a meditation, I was shown this vision of, more like a physical pyramid in the desert that's proceeding into a sort of etheric pyramid at the peak, and with a toroidal chessboard world in the background as well, which I will get to. That's probably the highest level of this diagram, is this chessboard world with the checkerboard tentacles coming out. But I was shown, a desert, and I was showing some of the other most important, tallest buildings in the world, historically tallest buildings in the world, behind the main power pyramid, because all that relates to the Orit B quote, which is actually on the diagram next to the Burj Khalifa Dubai building, which says, "He who builds the highest tower steals the power of the gods." And so there's a lot of different references in here, very subtle references in the background, such as the ship from Alien and Prometheus, which sort of is meant to hint at the idea of gods being involved on Earth, seeding life on this planet, the highest authority on Earth being connected with the supposed gods, which I would refer to as more like lower gods, not the highest of high gods, which we do have on the diagram at the top. This diagram is mostly evil because the system on our planet is mostly evil from the ground up, all the way through evil extraterrestrials who are controlling the highest human leaders on this planet. But I did want this diagram to proceed all the way past the evil into the good, the light at the end of the tunnel, the highest, most high God at the top of all of this, which is debatable, why this evil is being permitted to exist, if that is a benevolent God, or if it's more a God of duality. However, I do believe in an ultimate benevolent God, and it's just who we choose to align ourselves with on this planet, which we're in the process of realigning all this. So again, this system, this whole system, even into the extra dimensional areas, is in the process of being dismantled, at least in the vicinity of planet Earth. And so we will have a whole new hierarchy coming in soon. But this is just to let people know what we are dealing with. Some people ask, why is the White Hat Plan taking so long? Well, this is why it is taking so long. It is not a simple thing to deconstruct, and it has, many, many layers of reinforcement, many orders behind secret societies, behind, covenants between elites and dark magicians at the highest level, that all needs to be disentangled and removed properly, returned to source if it is something so evil that it can't be remediated. So as we are about to start explaining the different tiers of this diagram, which there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of, as well as some supplementary diagrams in the margins, I want to bring your attention to the fact that we offer the reverse side of this diagram, which is the reverse side of the flyer version, as well as the mini poster version, as a free download. So for the people who bought the poster early on, the beta version of the poster, they can get the essays from the free download site at Deep State Mapping Project to be able to understand the diagram a little bit better. And once again, this little eyeball illustration is going to be the sticker that comes with the diagram in the near future here, which actually this eye came from a relief sculpture on a police station in Bern, Switzerland. So that was the reference for it. I wanted God to specifically not be the triangular Illuminati eye, but I do think that there is universal symbolism to depicting God as an eye with rays emanating from it. And so that is not just a symbol that the secret societies and the Illuminati own. This is more of a universally recognized symbol of God, the Most High. I want to first kick this off with just briefly reading the essay about the entire diagram on the backside of the flyer. How to learn to read the map. Our world is built on hierarchical systems of power, control, cults, and controllers. This food chain of power extends all the way off planet and beyond the dimensions that we can visually perceive. Many versions of such power pyramids have been created in the past by other authors, but this world hierarchy pyramid aims to be the most comprehensive illustration of hierarchy ever created. Judeo-Christian and Gnostic conceptions of the higher realms are presented in contrast to each other on either side of the peak of the pyramid. The names and terminology of these two incongruent mythologies may also have analogous counterparts in Eastern philosophies. This rigid hierarchical system, which is a modern-day caste system derived from more ancient ones, runs in diametric opposition to the concept of individual freedom and the so-called American dream. It is a world built on blood oaths of silence and mass deception. One may escape this system, however, simply by reclaiming their own sovereignty and their birthright granted by God. Malicious forces achieve domination most easily by persuading subservient beings into offering their consent to be dominated. A disobedient slave can quickly become a dire liability to this system. Free will is a universal principle, but one must not forget that even God's natural world can be just as savage and unforgiving as Satan's hell matrix. So as we zoom in here and start from the bottom, I'm not going to go through every single point on this diagram, but I at least want to discuss each section and maybe bring your attention to a few specific important pieces of the puzzle in each section. And what I have written about this bottom section on the back of the diagram is this. Tier 1 is bronze, the general population. The ignorant masses live out their lives in a totally unaware dreamlike state, enhanced by psychoactive medications and highly developed EMF-based behavioral modification technologies such as 5G. Humanity suffers from mass MKUltra at the hands of intelligence agencies and the secret clubs controlling them. The normie, who actually believes what he sees on TV, perceives the highest level of ruling authority on Earth to be the UN. Propaganda is not questioned. This aggregate is considered livestock to the carnivorous reptilian extraterrestrials and hybrid noble families. So here you see the Matrix, also known as Satan's Hell Matrix, and all this different terminology of what has been referred to as the general population, from clones to robotoids, sheep, cattle, NPCs, zombies, Goyim, which means non-Jew, useless eaters, breeders, and the cycle of birth, school, debt, labor, taxes, retirement, and death, which is what they want to keep you trapped in, that rat wheel of just endlessly working for the system in order to never really get rewarded. And one of the last additions that I put on this diagram was this mark of the beast here in the center, which is actually the Monster Beverage logo, which is the same thing as 666 written in ancient Hebrew. And so, of course, we know now that the vaccine seems to have been the mark of the beast. And so we may be, in the final stages of this idea that Christians call revelations. Then, of course, above that, similar to the previous world hierarchy pyramid that I had shown, we have, religion, government, education, media, and I had added a few things here that I really believe are some of the main controlling forces on the general population, which are the bread and circus, the football, including all different arena gladiator games, Netflix, which has all but replaced the movie industry and has brought the mind control that was Hollywood into everyone's homes. Of course, entertainment industry itself and Hollywood, and the legal system as well, which is somewhat part of the government system, but also somewhat independent of the government system. And actually, if you really look into it, with all of our attorneys being a part of the bar system, our legal system in America is actually an extension of the legal system from Britain. And so really the legal system is more on an international level, with these lawyers having titles of nobility, which they're not supposed to be allowed to have in our country. Yet no one seems to notice or complain to change anything. So then you have corporations above the governments, which is very specifically placed there because in many ways it does, between lobbyists and bribes and what we call the revolving door, it would seem that corporations have more of a grasp of control on this world than the actual supposedly representative governments. And so the most important sectors of the corporate world are represented here, from banking, insurance, credit cards, to big pharma, big agri, big tech, mining, energy, shipping, real estate, consumer goods, communication, and the smart grid. All those so important to the cabal's control system. I would say if I had to rank them, right up there is banking, big pharma, big tech, energy, and mining, and shipping really are probably the most important ones, with the other ones being somewhat subordinate. But of course, all important spokes of the wheel of the cabal controlling this world. And now, two little words that may be overlooked here in the world resource control section there is crony capitalism and nepotism, which, we have so many proponents of capitalism in the West, and, everyone is so much against communism, especially in the MAGA movement. But I don't even really believe that what we have is capitalism, true capitalism. It's not a free market, because it's all a market based on crony capitalism and favors and deals made behind secret closed doors and secret meetings, deals between nobles and elites who are really running this system, creating their monopolies. And so much of the economy, from what I've observed in my life, seems to be mainly a simulation. Just one point in that I've observed most recently in my search for a car is that, so many of these cars have the exact same features and almost even the same design. You can look at all these different brands out there, but they're all virtually the same. And, you can apply that to so many different industries where we see the simulation of competition of different brands, but really there's not a whole lot of choice out there, and there's not really hardly anyone doing anything outside of the box. And so I do believe there is, at the highest level, some system of control that is creating a simulation of competition and different brands, when really it's kind of all goes back to the same controllers. As we do know, BlackRock controls everything. And there was a little bit of a question of whether corporations like BlackRock should be in this first tier, since they are, a corporation in the public world, but they are so high and so controlling that I actually upped the ante of some of these corporations and put them even in the higher section of secret societies and think tanks, which we'll get to in a minute here. But then the highest levels of publicly recognized institutional control on planet Earth are these international institutions: World Financial Control and World Institutions, which we have listed here: the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, Bank of International Settlements, World Economic Forum, stock markets. Many of those are central banks, including the central banks of every different country. And so many wars have been instigated in order to bring the Western central banking system into countries that were non-compliant. The UN, the EU, the WHO, controlling health globally. And then there are these military blocs, which are somewhat double represented in this category and the section above, the think tanks. But these are, military blocs, military alliances, which again, military contractors are corporations as well. So you could put them in the World Resource Control, but they sort of have an elevated position. And so I actually put them above the military secret levels of control. So that is tier 1, the bronze. As we get up here to tier 2, the silver, which can be defined as secret societies and think tanks. And the little subcaption that I have here directly in the center says, beyond the veil of ordinary perception. So this is the kind of stuff where if you try to talk to a normie about it, their eyes are probably just going to gloss over. They might tell you you're a conspiracy theorist and that things like the Bilderberg Group and all these other things just don't exist. Don't worry about it. However, these groups and even corporations, institutions are 100% confirmed to exist and exert a lot more control than the average person would like to think, since they do think that we have this representative form of government where the will of the people is actually carried out by the government in the interests of the people, which is unfortunately not the case. The secret world order is divided into 2 wings. Hexagon Group, which is shown on the left here, comprised of the Freemasons and Khazarian Mafia, controls the political, financial, scientific, educational, and media realms. Octagon Group, represented on the right of this tier, is the fortification of Hexagon Group, its military strong arm. Orders of knighthoods stemming from the Knights Templar and the Knights of Malta fill their ranks, now decorated with high military titles and in possession of nuclear launch codes. Maybe not so much anymore, since the Alliance has done a little one-up on these guys. Both groups work towards the New World Order. Special nations, such as Israel and Switzerland, are safe harbors for these globalist white-collar criminals who secretly worship Baal as they claim to have the authority to create international law. So let's zoom in a little bit here and see what we can see. We have the publicly recognized international assemblies, agreements, protocols, and tribunals, such as the European Court of Human Rights, the International Criminal Court, the World Zionist Organization, Geneva Convention. And on the right here, you have the more illegal groups, such as cartels, the mob, regional mafias, who are all involved in the drug trade. And a few of the most well-known cartels or mafias in the world would be the Sinaloa in Mexico, and Ndrangheta from Italy, the Triads from China, and MS-13. I'm not sure where their base is, but Central South American. You can refer to these as mercenary armies. And actually, mercenary armies was meant to reference what is called PMCs, or private military contractors, which are not illegal mafias like these other ones, but are being used more and more in kinetic conflicts throughout the world. It's said that Trump is actually protected by one of the most well-known Russian PMCs, private military forces, or private military contractors. And so I think on a future version of this map, I would like to add the term PMC because it's very important to understand in the big scheme here. But this is where this one stands at this point. And then in the center here is another thing that's quite important to understand is, how more normie organizations sort of are funneled into the Freemasonic system when it's all kind of one big system that works together. And so the sort of less nefarious manifestations of these types of organizations would be the labor unions, chambers of commerce, which exist in every different township, I believe, Lions clubs, which is sort of like a quasi masonry that's a little bit less intense, and Rotary International clubs, which these exist all over the country. Anytime you're driving into a town, you'll see signs for the Lions clubs, the Rotary clubs. And I'm not sure exactly how nefarious a lot of these are, but I do know that a lot of their membership overlaps with the Freemasons. And once you get into that Freemason structure, it's still not that nefarious until you get up to the 33rd degree, and then you find out that it's worshiping Lucifer and going along with all these New World Order, depopulation, anti-human agendas, and worshiping Satan, practicing black magic, spitting on the cross, breaking the cross, defiling the name of Jesus. And so, it's not necessarily bad at the lower levels, but it's all controlled by the higher levels, which are bad. And so very important to know if you're getting involved in any of these organizations and wondering, why your business isn't moving upward, isn't having upward mobility, is because, you're not part of this system. And they make sure that in the business world that only people who are involved in this system get to move ahead. And of course, running a business as well, you have to have the participation of other businesses to function. You have to have, shipping working with you, internet companies working with you. It takes a team to really run a functional business. None of these businesses, even like Amazon, are fully independent of other businesses. And so for the system to work, there has to be cooperation. And the people running the cooperation are the Satanists at the top, at the highest level of Freemasonry. And so that is how they have established an iron fist on control over the planet. Now, on this diagram, I have included the entire, what's called the Masonic structure, which shows you the progression of both the Scottish Rite and the Yorkish Rite. The Yorkish Rite including 10 main levels that you can step up through as you get to the top order, which is the Order of the Knights Templar, which is not the original Knights Templar. It's the Order of the Knights Templar rank within Freemasonry. Very important distinction there. And then the Scottish Rite, which has so many more ranks. The Yorkish Rite was the original one developed out of England, said to be developed possibly by Saint Germain with benevolent intentions in mind. And the Scottish Rite, the one developed on the continental Europe, I believe by the French lodges and very deeply corrupted by the Illuminati and Adam Weishaupt's organization over time, and developed so many different other ranks and rituals that were a lot more nefarious and got even more nefarious at the tippy top. So the Scottish Rite ranks are actually listed over here on the left-hand side of the diagram. Over here is all the Scottish Rite ranks, which, that may not be necessarily need-to-know information, but if you really look into the descriptive titles of some of them, it does become a bit interesting. And then here on the left are the other allied Masonic organizations, including Demolay Society for children getting into Masonry, as well as Rainbow Girls for the same purpose. Job's Daughter, Eastern Star, which is Masonry for the females, Tall Cedars of Lebanon, Grotto. And then the highest ranks of Freemasonry are up here, which are after the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, or I believe after the Order of the Knights Templar. Masons have the option of becoming Shriners, which is one of the highest ranks of Freemasonry. And within Shriners is the Order of Jesters, which is sort of the entertainment club for Shriners, which has a very bad rap. I mean, when you want to talk about human trafficking, prostitution, Jesters and Shriners are all over it. And of course, Shriners try to hide behind the humanitarian front that they run children's hospitals. But in all likelihood, there is probably some very nefarious activity going on in and underneath these children's hospitals run by Shriners. And I've heard several testimonies of, Shriners being involved in child abuse within their own families and, outside of their families as well. And some of the most important lodges, specifically running the whole Freemasonic structure, would be the United Grand Lodge of England, which is the first Grand Lodge in the world. The Grand Orient de France, which is the biggest French lodge, most important one. the most important Italian lodges, which were the P2 Lodge, which I believe was banned because of so much mob, mafia, and illegal activity. It was outlawed at one point in Italian history in the 20th century, which now is said to be the P3 Lodge. So the P2 Lodge was reincarnated as the P3 Lodge, which I'm not even sure if that one is on the official record books, but it is said to exist by people who are familiar with secret societies. And then, of course, the House of the Temple in D.C., which is the main lodge in Washington, D.C., probably controlling most of the American Freemasonry. And then esoteric Freemasonry, which is where you go, beyond the 33rd degree, beyond Shriners and Jesters. There is a whole secretive, underworld of Freemasonry with very, very high degrees that only, the highest Illuminati members actually get to. And so let's look a little more now at Hexagon Group, which I claim that Freemasonry is a part of. And you can see that because of the symbolism. The Freemasons use the compass and square, which actually fits almost perfectly into the Star of David or Star of Remphan, which is the symbol of Hexagon Group as well as the symbol of Judaism. It has been said that Freemasonry is Kabbalah for Christians. It is said by many researchers that Freemasonry is at its core a Jewish Kabbalistic organization. And of course, there are many lodges that are predominantly Jewish, but many more lodges that are predominantly Christian, and they mix as well. However, once you get to the level of Shriners, Shriners have an unmistakable Muslim influence in the Shriners. And so, it's all involved in the Abrahamic religions, but it would seem, at least within the Masonic structure, that Islam is sort of placed at a tier above Christianity and Judaism. And you can see that clearly even in the insignia of the Shriners, which is the sword with the crescent, tusk, and star hanging below it. I mean, they have a crescent star in their insignia. And there's a lot of, Islamic influence in the Shriners. And so let's look a little bit more into Hexagon Group, which is essentially synonymous with the Khazarian Mafia or the Jewish Mafia. And, they control essentially all of these scientific institutions, media, philanthropic foundations, NGOs, politics. They really have their fingers deep in so many different industries, almost everything other than the military defense industries, which they probably have. There's a lot of crossover in all of this. Let's be clear about that. And in these high global councils, such as the Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Club of Rome, Atlantic Council, RAND Corp, a lot of these have members that are definitely in Freemasonry. And so it's very hard to say, if what's higher, Freemasonry or Bilderberg Group. Well, I mean, Bilderberg Group is definitely comprising a more elite subset of individuals, but Freemasonry is a much bigger and probably, more important organization. And so these are all sort of not listed in an exactly hierarchical order because there's no definition of which is necessarily higher because there's so much overlap in membership. Even, like I said, a lot of members of the lower organizations such as Lions Club, Rotary International will also be Freemasons. But, no one in the flyover country will probably be a member of Bilderberg Group and, these higher secret councils. And I probably should have said this a little bit earlier, but it is important to be aware of the funnel organizations that go into Masonry, which, like I've said, include the Lions Clubs and things like Chambers of Commerce, but also very important to recognize is the universities and sororities, which are literally structured almost exactly like proto-Masonic organizations. And certain ones, such as Skull and Bones and the other major Ivy League sororities or fraternities, they filter even more directly into Freemasonry and also filter directly, in the case of Skull and Bones, into intelligence agencies and high-level political positions. And of course, we cannot forget to mention these highest-level global investment companies run by AI and run in their leadership by the Khazarian Mafia, such as BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which anytime there's nefarious activity with any corporation, you look at the shareholders, it seems to be these days inevitably BlackRock, Vanguard, and or State Street. So one other sort of minor, almost decorative point here is you see the two pillars on either side of this section, which are the two pillars of Freemasonry, Boaz and Yakin. And typically they are not labeled construction and destruction, but since the Masons are sort of the bridge between Hexagon Group and Octagon Group, and their members are involved in so many different both political and business organizations, it occurred to me that their two main functions within Freemasonry seem to be construction, as in building construction, building alliances, building scientific organizations. And then the other hand of that is the destruction. And this also relates to their checkerboard symbolism, which is so central to Freemasonry as well, and represented in the center of every lodge's main hall with the Freemasonic checkerboard floor, representing light and dark, construction and destruction. I also think the two pillars may represent a form of circuitry or a positive and negative charge, which, you know, they do have much ancient knowledge of ancient batteries. And so there's potentially something to do with that as well. And what I call megalithic circuitry, where similar structures to our microprocessors today were actually built into megascale monolithic structures such as the Parthenon, Solomon's Temple, and other ancient stone buildings. Of course, the original core tenet of Freemasonry was the keeping secret of the secrets of stone building and architecture. But over time, they had delved into so many other fields of study. So now let's look at Octagon Group, which of course you may remember that DSMP has its own entire Octagon Group diagram, which you can see a lot more about Octagon Group in detail there and in the essays of that, which, by the way, that is also a free download that is black and white on our free downloads page. But Octagon Group, essentially the military protective wing of Hexagon Group. And so here you find all the different military organizations on the highest level in the world, from the intelligence agencies, CIA, MI6, Mossad, SVR, which is the Russian one, to the main political and military figures within government. And so, of course, we have government on the first here, but we do consider the highest members controlling these different sections of government and the military to be, you know, on the next level of being in these secret societies and think tanks, which they most likely are themselves, you know, Masons and involved in whichever Bilderbergers, involved in all these other different secret societies, from the Postmaster General to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, which we know Hillary Clinton has been in that role before, all the way up to the Commander-in-Chief. And, you know, this is, I would say, mainly focused on the American structure here, but essentially all the different countries in the world have emulated the American structure, and the American structure was most likely dictated by foreign European influencers. And so it's essentially the same structure in most different countries. And then in America here, we have also even higher level political organizations such as the SCS, which really do control the deep state. DARPA, which I failed to mention on here, but is also a very critical part of the research arm of the military deep state. And of course, reminder also, we have an entire separate DARPA map at deepstatemappingproject.com, one of our less well-known maps, but very essential in all of this, especially in the big tech field, how all of big tech goes back to military development. And so at some of the highest levels of Octagon Group, once again, we have the military defense contractors, the American ones being Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all based out of Crystal City, VA, and the Pentagon, which we don't have necessarily Pentagon Group listed on here as a main category, but it's sort of interesting that, you know, we have Hexagon Group, Octagon Group, and then all of Octagon Group, or the headquarters of Octagon Group, essentially being run out of the Pentagon. And we have predecessors of the Pentagon in Italy, which were Jesuit war rooms. And so it does appear that the Pentagon itself is a Jesuit war institution. and that Pentagon group is, the most secretive of all of these different geometric shaped logo groups. And the highest level in this military wing are the aristocracy knighthoods. The first knighthood was the Knights of Malta and the Knights Templar. And there have been so many other branches develop over the centuries, such as the Teutonic Order, Knights of Columbus. It is said that the goal of Freemasonry, as you get higher and higher in the ranks, the goal is ultimately to be knighted. And so knighthoods have sort of branched away from being purely military over the centuries to be more of just a title, a noble honor of prestige to have. But of course, at the highest levels, a lot of these are involved in the military because, he who has the biggest gun, it makes the rules, essentially. This is how mafias work. And so they want to make sure that the people who are running the biggest guns, the people who are running organizations like these defense contractors, which we call in America the military industrial complex, which every country in the world has its own military industrial complex, and they're all interlinked through these secret societies. The controllers make sure that these corporations don't get out of line by making sure that the people running them are parts of these secret societies and are kissing the ring of, the highest leaders of the New World Order. And so now we get into this little section at the highest level of the silver tier, the secret societies think tanks tier, which is the highest level secret societies, including the Committee of 300, the Special Nation of Israel, the Illuminati, which of course, there was the original version that only lasted less than 10 years, created in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, was banned and dissolved by the German government at that time, which was clearly not as corrupt as it is now. Then there's the later incarnation of the Illuminati, which I'm calling here the Globalist Illuminati, which is not necessarily an official name for it, but as we know, all these different celebrities and modern culture are all flashing their, Illuminati signs. Rihanna at the Super Bowl. I mean, every different magazine cover where they're doing this. There's clearly a modern day version of the Illuminati that is even more off the books than maybe the original one, but they make it apparent that it does exist. And I think that it's more tangible, actually, if you were to see these individuals' ranks within Freemasonry. There's not like a brick and mortar of the Illuminati. There's not card holders of the Illuminati, I don't believe. But there's clearly something going on behind the scenes. The Olympians is a name that these Bilderbergers and highest level elites give to themselves, claiming that they are literally like the gods of this planet. There is a Supreme Council of 33 Grand Masters of Freemasonry, most likely running Freemasonry, I would assume, out of the Grand Lodge of England. And then there is the Priory of Sion, which is an even more esoteric group, which may actually be fighting for the good. So, the majority of this power structure is, I would say, evil and involved in the human trafficking and, the adrenochrome harvesting. But there may be a few sprinkled throughout here that actually do have good intentions that are trying to shift the course of this. The Priory of Sion potentially being one of them, supposedly created to bring back the Merovingian kings to the thrones of Europe, who were said to be the descendants of Jesus Christ and the anointed kings of God, who were robbed of their kingdom by the Catholic Church back when the Catholic Church had Dagobert II murdered, assassinated. And so some say that the Priory of Sion is a secret society behind all the other secret societies. It's a very mysterious one, though. Some say it's completely fictional. Something to look into. We've made videos about that as well, which I will throw up a thumbnail of here. And then we have the global institutions that are sort of like the dream of the New World Order, is, transforming the Nazi Party from the Third Reich into the Fourth Reich and having that be the controlling party behind the New World Order. It's said that they didn't actually lose World War II. They retreated to South America and Antarctica and then threatened the USA with higher technology, such as saucer craft that we had no defenses against. And therefore, we had to allow their scientists into our country and we had to eventually allow Nazi collaborator families such as the Bush dynasty, which George H.W. Bush's father was actually brought to court for collaborating with the Nazis, and then his sons went on to, rule the USA for, I think it was 3 or 4 consecutive presidential terms. So clearly the Nazi template has been adopted into the New World Order, and that was the intention. And then the neutral nation, Switzerland, where so many of these different international institutions are based and seems to be a control hub for the New World Order. And so in these final stages of the alliance operation, many of us who are well informed, myself, as well as I've heard Benjamin Fulford mention this, are hoping, I would say, or expecting to see some form of military action taken against Israel and Switzerland, which seem to be 2 of the main control hubs. And as we've learned more recently that Ukraine was slotted to be Greater Israel, that it was supposed to be the new haven of the New World Order, but Putin has sort of thrown a wrench into those plans. But Switzerland and Israel remain to be dealt with. QAnon has said Israel last. Q did not mention too much about Switzerland, but something has to be done about all those institutions there, including the World Economic, which seems since COVID to have really stepped forward as one of the main controlling arms of the New World Order based out of Switzerland, as well as the WHO, World Health Organization. So moving right on up the ladder here, and the next tier is gold, tier 3, the priesthoods and the bloodlines. Who curates the mind control exerted over the most powerful cults in the world? It is the priesthoods, the leaders of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. There are older cults preceding these, for a king is believed to be anointed by God, and ancient priest kings were studied adepts in the dark arts. Covens of warlocks and witches lurk in the darkest shadows of the royal ranks. Titles of nobility are a prerequisite to hold any authority in navigating mankind. There is, however, a degree of contested supremacy between the Jesuit Venetian, Islamic, and Asian dragon royal factions. So here you see it with the Vatican in the center. This is the spiritual control over this planet, primarily dominated by the Abrahamic religions. However, there is this Asian dragon family faction that we cannot fail to mention because they do wield an important element of power in the world. So why I put this section above the secret societies is because every member of these secret societies, such as Freemasonry or all these different councils, Bilderberg and such, they all have their own spiritual belief systems. And for the most part, those belief systems are governed by one of these 3 Abrahamic religions. But then, of course, as you'll see here, there are even darker occult organizations above, or maybe we could even say below, those publicly acknowledged religions of members of these secret societies. And since religion is an individual's most fundamental belief system, whatever they're doing in these different organizations or secret societies is going to ultimately be governed by their own moral principles, which is why, in my assessment, these spiritual organizations rank higher in control than these more political or corporate organizations. Essentially, Freemasonry is designed to regulate the corporate world. It's very much about business. And so spirituality is even deeper at the core of all of this, because ultimately these spiritualities lead back to Satanism is the problem here. So clearly the Vatican and the Pope are very central. The Vatican and the Pope has been central ever since my first Q-Web diagram. And so there it is in the center there with the sculpture of the pine cone, which is actually at the Vatican and represents the pineal gland of the human brain. And really small there that is the text under spiritual law, which says the pineal gatekeepers. And this is a very important aspect of all the spiritual law or spiritual organization of this planet, is to actually prevent normal people from accessing their pineal glands and their perception into the higher dimensions, and trying to convince people that we need these organizations like organized religion to be essentially the gatekeepers between the spiritual dimensions and our reality, to tell people that you don't have the ability to tap in, to talk to God yourself, even though that's what the Bible's all about, is your body is the temple. But the goal of these institutions has been to convince people of otherwise. And they have been very successful at it. So we have all three Abrahamic religions represented in this section. I have said before that the leadership of Judaism is a lot harder to pin down than that of Christianity, because they don't have a central figure such as the Pope. But I have listed a few here in relation to Judaism, those being the Kabbalists, the Talmudic Jews, the Sanhedrin, which was in the past a very much identifiable leading force within the Jews. It was the council of elders within each city back in the day. It doesn't officially exist anymore, but there may be similar structures that are sort of kept off the books. B'nai B'rith, which is an international organization that is in support of Israel and promoting Israel on the international stage. And then Shabbat, which Benjamin Fulford has said is the modern day front or organization of the Sabbatean Frankist Jews, which are a subset of Jews whose belief systems differed radically from the original Torah in around the 1600s by the influence of Sabbatai Zevi, and they became essentially a very radically satanic branch of Jews. And so those are the ones primarily controlling, I would say, Judaism on a global stage. Again, it's hard to identify a single organization that is controlling the religion at large, but there does appear to be some level of organization, even though it is more decentralized than the other Abrahamic religions. Important to not leave out here is the Mormon Church, which has been said in the Bloodlines of the Illuminati book, which is, one of the main conspiracy Bibles, claims that Mormonism is the supreme right of Freemasonry. And when you look at Mormon temples and some of their rituals, practices, and baptism practices, the meeting rooms, you can definitely see the similarity to Freemasonic lodges, much more so than to other Christian churches. Now we have here in the center as well the Order of the Garter, which is a secret society specifically intended to breed royals within England. You'll always see the badge of the Order of the Garter on the military or ceremonial uniforms of the royal family. Washington, D.C., controlling the military arm, Vatican City controlling the spiritual arm, and the City of London controlling the financial arm of the New World Order. So as the gold tier represents both priesthoods as well as bloodlines, it's important to recognize that titles of nobility and families which bear coats of arms are very much important in all of this. And it has been the struggle for centuries of the spiritual branch to actually control the royalty branch and vice versa. And so anyone having any of these royal titles, such as Archduke, Duke, Prince, Marquis, Count, Earl, Viscount, Baron, Chevalier, Esquire, which Esquire includes all lawyers in the United States, as well as the highest titles, Queen and King, are pretty much some of the highest ranking rulers of humanity that will be put in positions of authority over these secret societies, which then they in turn have authority over the corporations, which then they in turn have authority over the supposedly populist elected governments. And so the royals and the bloodlines with titles of nobility are the highest human controlling factions on this planet. And then, of course, I just mentioned bloodlines of the Illuminati, speaking about the Mormon Church, but we have here the families listed in the book Bloodlines of the Illuminati, which are some of the most wealthy, powerful, and controlling families in the world. Astor, Bundy, Collins, DuPont, Freeman, Kennedy, Lee, Onassis, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Russell, Romanov, Van Den, Krupp, and Reynolds. And now I was wondering why the House of Windsor wasn't on that list, but I would have to assume that they are higher than that, since it does seem that the remnants of the British Empire still hold quite a bit of authority on the international stage, even though, of course, I do believe that since Trump stepped in front of the Queen and dismantled a lot of this structure already, that they don't hold as much authority. But this is sort of the last screen capture of the cabal at their peak authority and organization before this whole structure began imploding. But of course, at DSMP, we don't forget to mention the papal bloodlines, which are not mentioned in the bloodlines of the Illuminati, but are also possibly even more powerful and have more authority than any of the bloodlines of the Illuminati, going all the way back to the Roman Empire's dominance in the world and the Holy Roman Empire as well. Those being the Farnese, Borgia, Colonna, Gaetani, Medici, Orsini, Pamphili, Aldobrandini, Chigi, and Conti families. Now, I have the Jesuit order above all of this because the Jesuit order is the military as well as missionary and educational branch of the Vatican and has been literally at war with the Vatican for several centuries. Several different popes said to have been assassinated by Jesuits attempting to get their Jesuit members into the position of the Pope. Of course, the Jesuits are all tied in with these papal bloodlines as well, but sometimes they are at war with each other. And of course, Jesuits controlling Jesuit universities throughout the world, which any American president who has been to a Jesuit university, you can assume that the Jesuits have got their fingers into him. And even in modern day, we have the first Jesuit pope installed in the Vatican. And so the lines have blurred over the century, but overall, it would seem that the Jesuits have, in the end, achieved more power than the Vatican itself, which is not too surprising, seeing as they are the military wing of the Vatican, and therefore, like I said before, he who has the guns, the biggest guns, makes the rules. And the Jesuits, if you read the Jesuit oath, have no qualms with resorting to the most despicable and backstabbing methods of gaining power, from the poison cup to the strangulation cord, poisoning the water supply. They'll do whatever it takes to gain more power and maintain it. As we move up the left side of this tier, we get into the Islam section, with the House of Saud being the most prominent family in Islam. Now, Islam is a bit like Judaism. There's no central figure for the entire religion. There are two main branches of Islam, being the Sunni and the Shiite, which in Saudi Arabia, the leader of Islam is called the Sunni Grand Imam, and in Iran, the leader of Islam is the Shia Marja. As we saw in the Iraq War, the Sunnis and the Shiites do not always get along. There can be some significant infighting and even ethnic genocide between the two groups. That seems to be the theme with all these groups, a whole lot of backstabbing and infighting, yet somehow they maintain enough coherence to maintain dominance above the general population. So let's jump over to the right-hand side of this tier now and discuss briefly the Asian dragon families, of which I have heard there is black Asian dragon families and white Asian dragon families, representing good and evil, essentially. This is more strictly titles of nobility and royalty as opposed to a religious doctrine. They are predominantly Shinto religion in Japan, as well as Buddhist, Confucius, and Taoist in China. But these religions are not quite as structured and hierarchical as the Western Abrahamic religions are. Of course, there's a very strong Masonic influence in Asia as well, and I have heard that it is the Grand Lodge of Orient out of France that controls a lot of the politics in Asia. It was the Khazarian Mafia that brought Bolshevism and communism to Russia, and most likely the Khazarian Mafia behind the CCP Communist Party in China as well. However, there do remain in the background these Asian dragon families that go all the way back to the Chinese and Japanese emperors, and they operate with a degree of autonomy from the Western power structure. It would seem that the black dragon families have more or less cooperated with these French Freemasons and Khazarian Mafia, whereas the white ones would be the thorn in the side, and they have their own separate structure of nobility, with the military leader being the shogun, the nobles being the daimyo, and the military warriors, which are comparable to the Templars, being the samurai, and they have their own code of laws called the Bushido Code. So there is some cooperation from that faction and other sources of contention. And as this White Hat Alliance speeds up, we're seeing the white Asian dragon families making their move against the Western Khazarian mafia controllers. So now we get into the dark side of spirituality, which operates behind the public veil of these Abrahamic religions and peeks through to the public at some times. We see here in the center Temple of Set, which was the organization founded by Michael Aquino, the director of psychological operations in the U.S. Army, and the ninth circle, the ninth satanic circle, that is, which is said to be a very high-level elite circle of Satanists. So all of these high-level elites are said to be occultists, practicing ritual magic and rituals to Satan behind the scenes. Some of these satanic organizations have peeked into the public view a little bit more, with something like the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey, being sort of a public front for Satanism to make people think that any normal person can just join in this satanic club and, be part of the Illuminati by doing so, when really that's not so much the case. I would say an organization like the Church of Satan is really just kind of a simulation to make people think that Satanism is not something that the elites are involved with, when really they have their own satanic orders that are very high up and very, very secretive. Some of this information I have gained insights from Jesse Sesbotar, who claims to be someone who defected from the Mothers of Darkness, which is the highest order female organization of Satanists in the world, who are all witches as well. Many of the highest level elites that do have titles of nobility and are from these Illuminati families are practicing witches and warlocks in their spare time. They are black magi who summon demons, become attached to demons, and make blood oaths to Satan and Lucifer. We have in the center here, between those two main obelisks, the cult of Baal and the synagogue of Satan, which are two terms that I've used very frequently in my various artworks. The synagogue of Satan being a reference directly from the Bible of Jesus Christ and other books of the Bible, referring to the current rulers of Judaism, which were at that time the Sanhedrin, as a synagogue of Satan. So saying that, although the original Torah was said to be the work of God, that no one was actually following it, and that they had become a synagogue of Satan in the meantime. And then the cult of Baal is obviously referencing the cult of Baal, my diagram, as well as the core beliefs of all these different Abrahamic religions, including Judaism, which goes back to the Canaanite pantheon and the worship of Baal, which the common practice of worshiping Baal was, of course, child sacrifice. And that's what all these corrupted Abrahamic spiritual belief systems ultimately go back to, is the Phoenician Canaanite pantheon and Baal worship. Also, top central here is the Merovingian bloodline, which is said to be the bloodline descended from either Jesus Christ or Satan, or both. And this is how, for a very long period of time, throughout all the Dark Ages, medieval period, and Renaissance, the kings and queens of Europe claimed authority to rule over the general population by claiming that they had blood descent from Jesus Christ or had married into the Merovingian bloodline of Jesus Christ. So claiming they had been anointed by God to rule the people, when really there was a lot of other nefarious activity going on behind the scenes, where these bloodlines had been significantly interrupted by priesthoods seeking more control and authority. Much of this also goes back to the priesthood of Amun, which is the original Egyptian priesthood involved in the Temple of Luxor, as well as the ceremonies and rituals in worshiping the Egyptian pantheon. And it was also in that period that Atonism developed at the behest of the pharaoh Akhenaten, in which he threw out the old pantheon and created the first monotheistic religion, which was actually the inspiration and template for the three Abrahamic religions which came later on. Which of these forces, which of those factions were more benevolent and which were more corrupted is definitely debatable. Some say that the original Hebrews of Israel were a combination of the Hyksos pharaohs, who were the invading pharaohs fleeing Egypt, combined with the priesthood of Amun, which had formed the 21st dynasty of Egypt and was one of the first dynasties of Egypt that was formed by the actual priesthood and not the line of pharaohs. So that could have been a point when the priesthood got a little bit too power hungry, and the first point at which the line of control over planet Earth was broken between God, the ruler, and the people, and then the priesthoods decided to step in and, create their own authority to govern the people. So moving up here to the highest level of the spiritual controllers of the planet would be the Eve Serpent Cain lineage, the most powerful, richest families, grand high priests and priestesses, the mothers of darkness, which I mentioned briefly already, Council of 13. I'm not sure exactly if that means 13 individuals or 13 families, but anyways, we're getting down to smaller and smaller and smaller groups of elites that are, having debates among themselves about controlling the planet. And then ultimately to the singular rulers or titles being Pharaoh, Emperor, King, Queen, Antichrist, and Pindar, which in various different geographical places and various different time pyramids, they have used alternatively these various different titles to define the peak level human in charge of all those beneath. And it is generally assumed that that peak human is the one who is the contact person between humanity and the higher dimensional realms. Since we have been in the fallen kingdom for most of our recorded history, that would be the contact person between humanity and Satan. So now we get into the off-world and extraterrestrial factions and forces controlling our world here on planet Earth. As I've said a few times so far, the main one being Satan, which is referenced in 2 Corinthians 4:4. That quote being, which varies widely from one version of a Bible to another, but is in some versions seems a little bit backwards and hard to interpret. But in the New International Version, it says, "The eyes of those who do not believe are made blind by Satan, who is the god of this world." So the big question is that quote saying that this world that we live in here, is it actually hell already? Or is there another hell beneath this one? That is debatable, but there are some elites that actually do believe that this is hell, this is Satan's kingdom, and therefore, as they worship Satan, they will become more authoritative in this world that we exist in. But is Satan an actual extraterrestrial person himself, or is he, and this is my belief, more of just a title of whoever the chief extraterrestrial, physical extraterrestrial would be that these top leaders of humanity are actually communicating with? Some possibilities of that individual being potentially either Enki or Enlil, who were the 2 primary Anunnaki gods of the Sumerian pantheon. Many Anunnakis being depicted sometimes as human, other times as reptilian entities. And we know from so much UFOlogy research that Draco reptilians are very high up in this whole power system, and that at these highest level meetings among elites and in secret councils, there are at times Draco reptilians involved and calling the shots in these. There is some terminology here that I have learned fairly recently and learned even a lot more about since I made my Nachtwaffen video a few weeks back. I did originally have Dark Fleet on here as well as Orion Empire, but I did learn recently the terminology Giza Intelligence Group, which is another name, supposedly the official name of the Nachtwaffen, which Nachtwaffen is a synonymous German term for Dark Fleet. This is the breakaway space program of the original Third Reich, the Nazis, which is said to have now expanded into a solar system-wide interplanetary conglomerate empire with many different slave colonies throughout the solar system. Of course, some of this is not necessarily provable, but this is what the whistleblowers and secret space program defectors are saying. And it certainly wouldn't surprise me. The large teal bubble in the middle of this section represents the extra-dimensional entities who are controlling everything in the physical realm below them. The most common terminology that we refer to these as is demons, archons, jinn in Islam, oni is a Japanese term. These are the entities that are summoned in a lot of these occult rituals and latched on to physical beings, essentially becoming the puppeteers of flesh and bone marionettes. There are even higher and bigger and more powerful extra-dimensional entities which are spoken of in some channel material, such as the Chimera, which are said to be giant extra-dimensional entities that look essentially like octopuses that hover over major cities on planet Earth and just suck all the negative energy, feed off the negative energy coming from these Cabal strongholds, which are our cities, based on all the suffering and all the different rituals going on in the cities. These are the type of entities that really only benevolent intergalactic forces are capable of dealing with. Nefarious threats to benevolent life in the universe. All of these demonic extra-dimensional entities represent detachment from source. They're feeding off of lower life forms to get their energy as opposed to being tapped in directly to the ultimate light of the universe, the Most High, the Almighty God. So I'm happy to say that this concludes the negative portion of the world hierarchy pyramid. And from here out, it's all of the benevolent forces, which have had less of an influence on the politics of this planet. But of course, on the ground level, the benevolent forces always have the strongest influence on we the people and on the actual natural law of the kingdom of Earth. That all this dark hierarchy is an attempt to usurp the power and the authority of the Most High and corrupt the natural law and the common law, God's law, and the universal free will that was meant to exist throughout the universe. A couple of the 3D physical world benevolent factions mentioned here are Solar Warden, which is said to be a white hat branch of the Navy that has established its own secret space program. Ancient astronauts, such as those mentioned in Ancient Aliens, which may have seeded life on this planet originally before other invading extraterrestrials came in and created systems of enslavement. And while systems of hierarchy and control may seem somewhat unfair in light of the system that has been established on Earth, there is such a thing as natural hierarchy and the hierarchy of different advanced levels of forms. This is shown a little bit on the right of the section here, where you see the progression of minerals to microbes, to plants, to fungi, to animals, to cetacea, which is essentially whales and dolphins, to mankind. That there is a hierarchy of intelligence here, that the whole liberal concept of everything being equal, we need equality in every division of society everywhere, it doesn't exactly make sense, because beings that are less advanced sometimes need guidance from more advanced beings in order to, successfully have a civilization. And that applies even beyond civilization into the natural world. And then hopefully mankind would be guided by angels and the Most High God as opposed to demons, jinn, and archons. So we then get into the even higher benevolent hierarchy, which goes from sages to spirit guides, chohans to ascended masters, devas, prophets, and the logos. The universal benevolent military force is known as the Galactic Federation of Light, as well as many other titles that describe that benevolent security force of the galaxy and even the universe itself. There are laws governing the benevolent forces known as the Galactic Codex, many councils of light and tribunals at the highest level, which regulate space-time itself and may or may not decide to intervene when violations of universal law do occur. And our local branch of the Galactic Federation is said to be Ashtar Command, which is who I typically attempt to work with and channel when I'm in my own meditation and getting advice for diagrams such as this one. So above all of this is at last the angelic realm. And now I must preface this and say that this is strictly from a Christian conception. There's definitely overlap with the Jewish conception, and maybe some overlap with the Islamic conception as well. But when you get into these very, very high realms of higher dimensional beings, there is really no concrete authority that can say this is exactly how it is. And the Christian conception may differ somewhat from the Hindu conception or other religions as well, Egyptian pantheon, Sumerian pantheon. However, I do believe that over time, through multiple different prophets of visions and people going into deep meditation and thinking about these things and receiving information from the higher realms over centuries, that the Christian conception has been quite refined to be a decent reflection of what does actually exist in the higher realms. And so while there may be different systems of organizing these entities and different names for them, that this is a fairly solid way to structure what is actually going on in the higher realms as you get up closer and closer to the one true almighty supreme being, God. So in the Christian conception of the angelic realm, there are 9 choirs. And in the third tier, the lowest ones are angels, archangels, and principles. And then the second tier, powers, virtues, and dominions. And the third tier are thrones, cherubs, and seraphim. And of course, within Christian mythology and beyond, there are the archangels, who are the ones who serve and interact with humanity directly. And Lucifer was originally the highest archangel under God before he staged his rebellion. And under him, there were the other archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Samuel, Haniel, Zaphkiel, Zadkiel, Raziel, and Metatron. And of course, this list may not be complete or fully comprehensive, but those are the main ones who have been recognized throughout both Christian and New Age thought and channeling. Tiny but critically important here is the Grail Stone, which is said in some mythologies to be the stone that fell from Lucifer's crown during the war in heaven. And it is the Grail Stone that is bestowed to the Rex Mundi on planet Earth to be the ruler of planet Earth. The Grail Stone potentially being a communication device between the ruler of Earth and, depending on your worldview, God or Satan, Lucifer. So it is said that whoever controls the Grail controls the world. And that has really been the motivating ethos of the Illuminati and the priesthoods and the kingships throughout all these centuries of our civilization. So finally, we reach the very top here, the prime, almighty, supreme being, which in the Christian Judeo-conception is given the name Yahweh, which means I am that I am. In the Gnostic conception, this is called the supreme unknowable being, and he is said to exist as a trinity of forms between the God, the Son of God, and the Holy Spirit, or God's aura. This is said to be the supreme God of all forms, as well as concepts and institutions, from the sun to the moon, the earth to the sky, the storm, the sea, war, justice, protection, and wisdom. It's all gods rolled into one, which again was first conceived of by Akhenaten when he created Atenism, and has been adapted by the Zoroastrians, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. Of the angelic realms, we say this in the diagram's essays on the back. God is the unknowable supreme being, one that the lower gods claim to be but are not. God is the light, he who giveth life, for Satan is that which taketh away. God inhabits all life forms and minerals in his kingdom at all times. In God's audience are high orders of beings composed of eyes, tetramorphic heads, and layers of feathered wings. Wheels within wheels spin in his presence, opening portals into all timelines for God to see. This is an incomprehensible realm, many orders of dimension higher than that which you experience in the 3D. Now, I took great painstaking care in this diagram. I spent a whole day rendering each of these little icons for the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones, or oraphim, which you see here to the left and right of God. The seraphims usually being depicted as heads or eyeballs surrounded by wings. The cherubim, which were described in Ezekiel's vision, were entities with 4 wings and 4 heads and cloven feet, the head of a human, the head of an ox, a lion, and an eagle. Now, some say that these are just analogies for astrological features. However, I like to take Ezekiel's vision literally, but who knows if it's actual entities out there that actually look like this, or if this is a symbol or a metaphor of something else. But then, of course, there's the Oraphim as well, which are wheels within wheels covered by eyes in the account of Ezekiel. And to me, that brings to mind the idea of some form of a stargate is what I see that as. And so I depict those flying around. They also look somewhat like what our scientists call atoms with their, spinning fields of electrons. So whatever the Bible meant by that is still up for interpretation, but that is what Christians are said to believe. And this is, of course, the Christian conception which I've presented here. So now you may be wondering, what is this crazy chessboard world that I have created surrounding the highest level of this power pyramid? Well, I discussed this in my video about 5D chess a little more than a year ago, but essentially the chessboard world is a metaphor, more or less, of the dimension that our world is built inside of. The entire power structure is built with the same basic pieces as a chessboard. The king, the queen, bishops, knights, rooks, and pawns. Is our reality simply a game of 5D chess to beings in higher realms looking for entertainment? What does the king who has everything do to occupy himself and ensure his own longevity? He builds checkerboards, starts battles, and delves deeper into magic and the art of illusion. Who ranks above the king? It is he who is playing the game himself. If our world is a simulation projected by means of advanced technology, there would still necessarily be a world beyond that, where such technology was created. There is dark and light on all levels of the hyperdimensional time cube prism. Our world at present is transitioning from being dark-dominated for the past several thousand years since Atlantis to being light-dominated for an extended period. A golden age is upon us, with new leaders, not rulers, anointed by God, and the chess master, Satan, and his minions will be relegated back to their own simulation world. So guys, there you have it. That is the world hierarchy pyramid. About as detailed as a summary as I can get into at this time. We are already in overtime for this video. And so that is about all the energy I have for today. It's pretty intense information, as you can probably see. But I have done everything I could to make this as accurate as possible, which most of my audience is probably Christian, or at least born Christian. And so therefore, we do present the Christian conception. But there are, other conceptions as well, of course, of the higher realms. We know that there is good and evil, dark and light on all levels of this playing field. And therefore, our conception of demons and angels, whether you call them that or call them aliens, benevolent or evil aliens, carnivorous or vegetarian aliens, is all up for debate, whether you fall more into the UFOology category or, the Christian category or the New Age category. Everyone has a similar conception of what's actually going on. They just have a lot of different names and titles for things. I don't think people should waste their time getting into big heated debates over, whose title is best, when we all know that there is good and evil, there is duality, and our world has unfortunately been predominantly dominated by the evil for our entire documented civilization, not including Atlantis and Lemuria, which our historians don't even acknowledge. But, we have had light-dominated civilizations in the past, and hopefully we are on the verge of getting back to one, restarting the Golden Age. Everything Trump said on 3/3 with talking about the quantum leap in the American living standard sounds a lot like a Golden Age is on the way. And with his announcement on November 15th, prior to the election, again, speaking about a Golden Age, these things are not impossible to create with the right leadership who is tapped in and connected with the Most High God of the universe, the benevolent one, the all good, as the real would call him. and not Satan, the ruler of this world, for most of our recorded history. So once again, in conclusion, you can get the World Hierarchy Pyramid as a letter size print, handheld, a lamination or cardstock, which comes with the back. The mini poster, which is 12 by 18, and will, going forward, include the free sticker of the God's hologram eye with it. And then, of course, the large 24 by 36 poster, which is really the definitive version of the diagram, which you can get it signed or unsigned. I signed them myself. Those are the ones that are going to be worth a little bit more money after I pass 3,000 years from now. But that's a nice little option to upgrade your poster. Again, I think this might be the most visually appealing poster I've made, even though it does deal with some pretty dark content. When you liven it up with some decoration and background, it really makes it more digestible and appealing. And I spent a great deal of time getting that chessboard world to really look like dead on and get those tentacles right. I would say the chessboard world has a lot to do with what people see behind our reality when they're on plant medicines such as DMT or psilocybin. So you may have to take a hero's dose to really understand what's going on there. And that's just one way of representing it. I see it also as a possibility that the chessboard world is actually being projected or manifested by the nefarious factions within that green bubble of the archons and demons and demiurge, and not necessarily the will of the Most High God. Some people say that there are major elements of our reality here on Earth that are projected from a satellite system in or around the planet Saturn. So that could potentially be the source of the chessboard world that we are experiencing here. Now, will the Galactic Federation or the Alliance fleet make one final offensive on Saturn before the end of this war between the White Hats and the Deep State? I'm not sure, but more people recognize that this chessboard world, this matrix of duality, is what we are being trapped in here. I think the sooner we recognize it, the sooner we'll escape it and get back to our connection with the Prime Creator. So guys, once again, leave a like and subscribe on this video. Leave a comment if I missed anything, if I left anything out. There will probably be more editions of this to come, and hopefully many more maps from DSMP in the future. We always like to one-up ourselves and make it more and more complete picture of what's really going on in our reality. So stay safe out there, know your enemy, and we'll see you on the next map walkthrough. This is A145 signing off.
Living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the future of finance. Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people. Economy flows.
What's wrong with you, President?
You'll find out. You'll find out.
Now we saw a black triangular craft fly just right through those